This is Behind the Headlines, with behind-the-scenes analysis on issues affecting Pennsylvanians, sponsored by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Now, here's your host.
Hi, from Philadelphia to Erie and from Scranton to Pittsburgh. It's Behind the Headlines. I'm Charlie Greenwald, Senior Fellow of the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy, and I'm joined as normal by my colleague, Maura Donnelly. Maura, welcome.
Hello, Charlie.
How have you been?
Oh, I'm great. How are you?
All right. The state just celebrated Charter Week not long ago. The State Museum and the Rare Book Room wheels out William Penn's Frame of Government.
Oh, that's cool.
That he wrote on the ship to America in 1682. Once a year, it's on display for a week. Did you attend?
I didn't. I did not know about it. That would have been great.
It's not too late.
Oh,
it's
okay.
Not too
Oh,
late.
good. I'll get over there.
But it's interesting that the Holy Experiment had started with the card game. So we'll talk
You
about
went,
that.
apparently.
We will talk about that later.
Okay.
But today, talking about a holy experiment, we have something that's of similar ilk with our higher education has been doing so well in Pennsylvania for so long, and we have a new member of our team for higher education here in Pennsylvania as our guest today. We have Dan Greenstein, who's the new Chancellor for the 14 state-owned universities. Welcome to the show, Chancellor.
Thanks, great to be here.
We're so happy to have you. And we have Ken Mash, who is the president of APSCUF, our faculty union for the 14 state universities. Welcome back, Ken.
Hi, Charlie.
Why, Chancellor, first of all, you're the first Chancellor we've had not from Florida for a while. We were wondering how much of a tan you'd have when you came in. You're setting yourself apart from your predecessors there a little bit.
Yeah, I came from Seattle for the sun in Harrisburg.
A little cloudy there, huh?
Right.
A little rainy.
Especially this time of year.
The rumor's true.
Yes, yeah, not in the summer, but right now, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, Chancellor, when you inherited this position, you inherited a whole slew of difficult legacy problems. You ran into pessimistic studies and pessimistic articles about our state universities and many across the country. It is a considerable advantage that you bring. You've brought a fresh outlook to the situation. Where do you find the optimism that you bring to the table? Is that buffeted by your, was that burnished, I should say, by your 14 university tour?
No, not really. I mean, if anything, it's uplifted. I'm a naturally optimistic person, I think. I think I chose the Pennsylvania state system as much as it chose me because I was looking for an opportunity to reimagine the future of public higher education, given that the challenges that we're facing are challenges that are faced nationally by universities, particularly in the public sector. And this university system is unique in some respects because it has a certain readiness about it. It is ready to tackle and address those challenges in new ways, which is not necessarily the case across the country. So I chose wisely, and my tour of universities suggested that I chose well.
Good. Well, Chancellor, we're hearing a lot about, quote unquote, the transformation. Can you give us a little bit of background about what that is and what that means for the state-owned?
Sure. So we've got, as you know, 14 wonderful universities, each of them deeply rooted in their communities, all of them offering a very high-touch, personalized kind of education, a liberal arts style of education at a public university price. They prepare students for very successful careers, not just in the workforce, but also in their communities. And they're much more different than you would think, than the narrative suggests. The challenges that we face are those that are available across public higher education. Generally, the state is 48th in the nation in terms of its investment. That's driven tuition up, which has begun to attack student enrollment. And that's challenging anyway in a state where there's more universities than there are students typically to fill them. So, a variety of challenges like that confront us. And so the transformation is really how do we leverage the power of 14 universities and the combined operating scale in order to expand opportunity and to address some of the challenges that we have.
Ken, you've been on the front lines of the classroom and on advocacy for some time. Where do you see optimistic signs at this point?
Well, I do think that it's great, first of all, that Dan has come in and sort of refocused the narrative in the Commonwealth, which, as you said, was getting to be pretty negative with those reports that had come out and some of the things that had been in the news. So, I mean, I think that it presents us in the light that we should be presented. Dan has taken that, made that a real focus point of his, and I think that bodes well for the future. But ultimately, I think that we need some real attention on these public policy choices about funding and some real support for public higher education in Pennsylvania.
So the professors that you represent face some pretty substantial challenges on a regular basis. They've got to identify and help the students who may not have learned everything they needed to in high school, and it's probably one of the more underwritten stories about the professors. So can you tell us a little bit about the role that the professors are playing and how prevalent it is that they are?
Yeah, well, I mean, as far as students being prepared, I don't remember a time since I've been involved in higher ed that I haven't heard the story that the students are not prepared to learn. It seems to be just a recurring theme. I think that's part of the challenge that professors have. They love their disciplines, they love their students, and I think particularly in our introductory courses, it's an opportunity to be able to explain to the students why the discipline is important, why it is something that they should learn much more about and be interested in. And I think that that's one of the more rewarding things about being a professor.
Chancellor, as we look forward to the future of higher education in Pennsylvania, are we at a point where we can or should give much more latitude to the universities to sponsor innovative programs if they wish, or even variable tuition and variable fees?
Yeah, I mean, the path that we're on envisages a great deal more responsibility for the universities to determine the course of their own trajectory with a much higher degree of accountability, not just to the system, but to one another. Because the way we're constructed as an organization is the success of any one institution really relies financially and in other ways on the success of every other. So that accountability it really needs to run across the institutions in a network kind of fashion as opposed to up and down to the Board of Governors, although that's important as well.
And do you think the schools do a better job at sustaining enrollment and improving graduation rates on their own as well as being innovative?
Well, I think it's interesting. You know, there's a great research literature on the network, on what are called network effects in higher education, Tony Brake's work, and demonstrates that by working closely together, universities not only solve real problems more quickly, they amplify the impacts that those solutions have on their students. And so I think where we're going in this transformation is to create platforms which enable that collaboration. So it's a mix of pursuing your own trajectory, but doing it sort of working closely together in a variety of ways. Yeah.
Ken, where are we going in terms of the system and in terms of the union, in terms of initiatives to try to attract the best professors, the best teaching talent?
Well, I think what we need to be doing first is to make sure that we're funding our universities properly so they're in a position to be able to attract those professors. And you had raised just a minute ago about the different funding at the different universities. I think we want to find a careful balance to make sure that when our universities are doing that and coming up with different tuition, pilots or ideas for how they should charge, that we continue to fulfill our mission as the state-owned universities, which is, and I think has been and should be, to provide an affordable higher education for particularly working-class Pennsylvanians.
So the governor's put a lot of emphasis lately on workforce development. Do you continue to see a role for liberal arts in this push for workforce development in the technical fields? Chancellor, you smiled. Let's.
You want to go first?
Let's hear you both.
So what's interesting is I understand the evolution of the future of the work. We're training students now for jobs that don't exist. Mm-hmm. The top 10 jobs today didn't exist 6 years ago, right? So the most important training we can offer our students is the ability to learn and to think critically and to continue to evolve, right? I think the great advantage of the Pennsylvania State system universities is that they combine those fundaments of a liberal arts education, and then they provide a technical layer of training that enables a student, not in every instance, but in many, to get that first job. So you're equipping a student not only for their first job, but more importantly for life, and that's going to be increasingly important going forward.
There's a lot of focus on career and finding a good job at the end of it, and that's not only understandable, it's right that people should focus on that. But nevertheless, we tend to believe that there's more to a college education than just merely finding a career, that college education, and studies prove this, make you happier in the end, you appreciate life more, you are better citizens at the end of it. So there's a whole array of things that come to you through liberal arts in particular that you don't necessarily pick up in the career path. But I do think there's opportunities and a greater understanding that what we need to do is to give that basic education to people and allow them the opportunities to move across various different occupations, because virtually everybody agrees that that's what's in our future.
How do both of you envision, how do our organizations envision the university sharing resources, sharing opportunities? What does the future look like in that regard?
Well, I'm waiting to find that out too as we go through this planning process, and I do appreciate the fact that the Chancellor has been very inclusive as far as bringing in faculty, bringing in students, bringing in people from our different universities and talking about what to do. But my hope is, and I've expressed this to the Chancellor, that this isn't just about looking at ways to contract, that in fact it's also about creating greater opportunities for our students, our ability to offer programs that may not be viable at one or at any of our universities, but working collectively, we could offer those programs to our students, that we could do some great things with career services, working together and harnessing that power of having 100,000 students that we couldn't do independently. I brought up several times things like study abroad, which I think if we were working collectively on that as opposed to 14 individual universities, we could really create some powerful partnerships overseas and provide, again, more opportunities for our students. So I think it cuts both ways. It's about, understandably in the environment that we are in, I think looking for opportunities to cut costs where we can, but it also presents this chance to expand opportunities.
Chancellor?
He's just taken all my talking points. I think that's exactly right. I mean, I think in some ways the limits of our opportunity are really the limits of our imagination. As operating as an entity which has 100,000 students just provides scale opportunities that don't exist for a single university with 7,000 students. Not that that's a bad thing, but why shouldn't we give our students and our employees every chance we can to improve themselves and their work?
So there's a game that students play in an attempt to have a good grade point average, and they try to take the easiest classes and.
Not our students, surely.
No.
I've not heard a thing like that.
I thought all students played that little game, because a grade point is important, to parents, to everybody. So. How do you address that? How do you deal with the students who are doing that?
I'm going to turn that to Professor Match, if I may. It's been a long time since I was in the classroom.
It's getting to be that way for
I
me
know,
too.
right?
But again, I think that's one of those things that has always occurred at the universities. I think most of my colleagues just want to be thought of as being fair to their students. And there's niches for everyone. And I think once you get into your major and into your discipline, students do tend to respect the fact that you're challenging them. And so you'll always wind up with students who are looking to take when I was in college, I had a professor talk about the grease slide through the college.
Yeah.
There will always be students who are looking to do that, but there is a very, very healthy amount of students who are very serious. And they, like I said, I think they respect if you are challenging, as long as you're fair.
Okay, this is a good place to take a break. We'll be right back with the second half of our show, and we'll be right back with the Chancellor and with Ken Mash after this. Stay tuned.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors, the largest, most influential municipal association in the Commonwealth. Since 1921, PSATS has been preserving and strengthening township government and securing greater visibility and involvement for townships in the state and federal political arenas. Covering 95% of Pennsylvania's land mass, townships represent 5.5 million residents, more than any other type of political subdivision in Pennsylvania. Behind the Headlines is also brought to you by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, helping hospitals provide healing, health, and hope to communities across the state. And by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. The Pennsylvania Chamber serves as the frontline advocate for business on Pennsylvania's Capitol Hill by influencing the legislative, regulatory, and judicial branches of state government. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Visit pahighwayinfo.org.
Welcome back to Behind the Headlines. On this section, Maura and I are going to continue to probe some of these issues affecting higher education in Pennsylvania. Maura, why don't you kick it off?
Chancellor, you just went through your budget hearings. How'd that go?
That's fun.
No, fun?
Yeah.
Okay. Good times?
Enjoyed it, yeah.
There are some negative assessments of performance that you had to deal with. How do you recapture the trust of taxpayers, students, and the parents who might have some doubt about the value of the state system?
Well, the value of the state system is, as we were talking about in the last segment, shows up in the outcomes for our students. They get good jobs. They're well-paid jobs. They have health outcomes that are better than people who are not going to college. They are more active in their communities. So the value of the education is sort of is unquestioned. I think there are concerns about the system and the level of accountability that it shows towards, I guess, the General Assembly, and through the General Assembly, the people of the state of Pennsylvania. And those issues are fundamentally addressable. And our approach has been my approach has been just one of radical transparency. Just here's where we are, here's where we're going. I'll report back routinely on how's it going, and I expect to get feedback.
Good.
Okay. Question for both of you. Ken, maybe you could start out. Is there not a connection between declining state support and rising costs and rising student debt?
Researchers would, love to get the kind of correlation that exists when they're doing studies between allocation going down and costs going up. That's just the absolute reality of the situation. And we have been engaged in this, doing everything that we can to try and get more support for the state system in particular. But, we're concerned about public higher education in Pennsylvania overall. And, Pennsylvania is 49th when it comes to the amount of state allocation per pupil. We are 51st, I think, at this point in student debt, if you count Washington, D.C., too. There are real public policy choices that are hurting students in Pennsylvania. We are not able to provide opportunities to students at the same rate that we used to be able to do so. And I think ultimately the outcome hurts not just our students, it's not just killing a generation, but we're hurting ourselves as well. So when I see numbers like the fact that Pennsylvania's graduates have a combined $65 billion in outstanding loans at this point, I think it's fair to ask the question, if the state kicked in as far as the cost at the beginning, how much money would be returned to our economy overall? If they were spending $1 billion more up front and getting back $20 billion as far as students being able, when they graduate, be able to buy houses, buy cars, and do the things I think that my generation just took for granted that you would do when you graduate, we would all be the beneficiaries of that, on top of the fact that by providing more opportunities, having a more educated Commonwealth, looking after our own students, that you create the kind of environment in the Commonwealth that will attract businesses to come and good paying jobs for the future. So I think that we really do need to bring attention, a whole lot of people need to bring attention to the state of higher education in Pennsylvania.
I think in general, just a general question about the budget hearing or the budget process so far, have the legislators been receptive to, the arguments you're making that there's a need for more funding?
Just to add to the points that were being raised, I mean, there's actually a medium-term problem, potentially a crisis for the state of Pennsylvania, because it's pricing its students out of higher education, and by pricing your students out of higher education, you're going to undermine the potential opportunity of building a workforce that's going to be required to keep the lights on in the economy. There's already, the data show a pretty significant mismatch between the skills that the educated population has and the skills the workforce requires. That's going to get worse, right? Because fewer and fewer people are going to be able to afford to go to college, and they'll make other choices. Alternatively, they'll move out of state when the cost to student of a public higher education in the state of Pennsylvania is actually higher than the cost of out-of-state tuition in a neighboring state.
That's a problem.
It's a major problem. And we'll discover that Pennsylvania will become a net exporter of students. And funnily enough, students tend to get jobs in the place they completed their terminal degree, right? So there's a talent drain, right? So you've got a workforce problem, you've got a talent problem, and then you can approach it from an equity issue. Increasingly, it's only the well-to-do that can afford to have a college education and gain access to the pathways into, sustaining careers. And you see that in all of the evidence that suggests that. And I think that the data that I'm familiar with is if you're in the lowest economic quintile, you have a fifth the chance of somebody in the highest economic quintile to have a college degree by age 24. So that the inequality that we're experiencing across the country becomes worse in the state of Pennsylvania. So you've got workforce issues, you've got population and brain drain issues, you've got equity issues. All of these things are going to impact the tax base of the state of Pennsylvania. I mean, the short-term thinking about, funding for higher education has really significant long-term deteriorating effects on the state.
Is there any state getting it right?
There are plenty of states that are getting it right.
So we have some examples out there?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you got Tennessee, you got Ohio, you got New York doing really interesting things with, under the current governor. These are states, by the way, that aren't too far away from here.
Right.
You've got promise programs that are budding in places like New Jersey, right? So where does Pennsylvania want to be? You can look at Tennessee as a kind of sort of gold-plated first-class Cadillac in terms of higher education innovation over a period of years. You can look at California, which is sort of going through, and I spent a lot of time there, never thought California would be able to do anything. Don't take that offense, anybody who may be watching from California.
We don't have any Californians watching.
Incredible source of innovation at the moment. So, this is not, we're in a race, and the race is not going to be won by the meek, and there's some real significant costs to not at least competing.
Well, Chancellor, going to one of the perhaps the most difficult question confronting the system and confronting you and our union as well. Ken has been a voice in the wilderness for some time, and as time has gone by, he's gotten more and more support, noting that there seems to be and has been a problem at Cheney University. What can be done at Cheney?
There's so many opportunities, and I think there's a widespread commitment to taking advantage of them and finding a sustaining path for Cheney, and creating an opportunity where, we can not only sustain the university going forward, but to be proud of what it does, and we all aspire to that end. There are any number of different opportunities that are being actively considered.
Lincoln is a state-related school. Lincoln doesn't seem to have many of these challenges Is there any thought at some point of perhaps maybe urging the two institutions to look at combining in some way, shape, or form?
So mergers and acquisitions, consolidation is a real trend in higher education for many of the reasons that we've addressed. It's pretty rare that two relatively weak institutions get together and do well. Typically where you see this kind of work happening, you see institutions coming together which complement one another with respect of what they do, and where there is significant financial sustainability and strength in one and perhaps less so in another. I'm not sure I'm aware of a case where two pretty strained institutions are getting together. It's, remember, these are entities where I'm very familiar with the consolidation practice and the mergers and acquisitions trends that are out there. There's a lot of diligence that takes place on both sides of that equation, and actually making time for that and really thinking through that. One thing I will say about Cheney, it's fascinating, and actually it's true with all of our institutions, a number of them have some pretty significant challenges. Everybody has a passionately held opinion about what could be done. Creating the platform and the process and the governance structure which allows those sort of meaningfully to come together, and then choosing, because in an environment where there are multiple options, that choice is going to satisfy some and significantly dissatisfy others. And my observation of the state system, having been here, and it doesn't affect my optimism, is that the challenges that we face now because of decades of being unable to take tough decisions at those moments when they were needed, for that very reason.
Maura, we have 1 minute left.
Well, I wanted to see if you have any comments on Cheney.
I have a lot of comments on Cheney.
A lot of ideas on how to fix things.
Look, I think you just have to start off with the fact, and I think it's undeniable that university has been, well, first of all, it exists to address past discrimination. That's its history, but I believe it's been the subject of various types of discrimination by policymakers all across Pennsylvania. And its success has struggled largely because people were not willing to step in and do things at crucial times. And I study civil rights, and my understanding is usually if there's been some wrong, there should be some remedy for that wrong, some redress for that wrong. And I think it's well past time for those people who care about Cheney, its mission, to get together and figure out a plan for the future so that we are properly serving those students who I think desperately need a functioning Cheney University.
And on that note,
can I just say one last thing?
In 5
these two gentlemen, I want our viewers to know that these two gentlemen don't always agree on everything, and often find yourselves on opposite sides of issues. But we thank you for both being here and having a civil discourse on these issues today.
Yes, we find this is a tremendous level of harmony and cooperation.
We haven't disagreed about anything
we
yet.
haven't seen for some years. We want to have you back to continue this discussion. Unfortunately, we're out of time for now, and we'll see you again next week on Behind the Headlines.